I'm now a little scared of what story he's going to share. Just know that any story shared, there are other stories to go with it. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. One thing. Two little words. One thing. If you could have just one thing, what would that be? If the proverbial house was on fire and you could only take one thing out, what one thing would you take with you? The parent said to the child, I ask you to do one simple thing. One thing. When the speaker or the teacher says, if you don't remember anything that I've said before, remember this one thing. Such simple words. But yet throughout the Bible, we find those words. There are 14 or so occasions where you find that phrase, one thing. I'm not going to go over all 14 in the devotional. But I want to point to a couple of them, a few of them. For instance, in Psalm 27 and verse 4, the psalmist says, one thing I have asked from Yahweh that I shall seek, that I may dwell in the house of Yahweh all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of Yahweh and to inquire in his temple. One thing I have asked, he says, to be a part of the Lord's family, to be a part of the Lord's house. What one thing? What one place is important to you? Paul says in Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, one thing I do, forgetting the things which are behind and reaching forward to the things that are ahead, I press on. One thing that I do. Well, Paul, didn't you used to? I don't know what you're talking about. I forgot all that. Paul, weren't you the one who? I've forgotten all that. One thing I do. As Christians, we start fresh. One thing we do. In John chapter 9 and verse 25, Jesus has healed a man, and a blind man, and the Pharisees are questioning him and his family, and they ask, is this man a prophet? Who is this man that healed you? And he says, one thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. All I know is that this man did good for me. I don't know if he's a prophet, if he's from God, but I know he did good for me. How can he be bad? One thing I know. One thing. In Luke chapter 10, Mary and Martha are playing host to Jesus, and Martha is busy. And Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet, and you know the occasion. You know what happens between Mary and Martha. You know the looks that are going between the two of them. You know that Martha is wondering why Mary's not helping her. And she questions Jesus, and she says, Master, tell her to help me. And Jesus says, one thing is necessary. One thing. This is an invitation. This is a devotional. And so hopefully you understand that what I'm about to do is point you to one thing. And that one thing is the good news. That one thing that is our life as a child of God is the good news. There are a number of ways to say good news. Sometimes we use the word gospel. Sometimes in the book of Acts they use the word grace. In fact, in Acts chapter 15, verse 11, Peter says, James says to the Gentiles. Is it James or Peter? One of the two of them. James says to the Gentiles, this is what I know, that they will be saved by the grace of God just as we will. One thing. The one thing that you can depend on, the one thing that is the most valuable in your life, the one thing that is more important and better and beyond and above all the words we could come up with, anything else, is the good news. That is the grace of God in Jesus Christ. Now, if you're not a child of God, we understand that good news comes in this form, the death, burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, what he did for us that we could not do for ourselves. And we understand that the text teaches us that we obey that death, burial, and resurrection by reenacting that death, burial, and resurrection by faith, and therefore putting on Christ when we die to self, are buried, and rise again. As a child of God, we should be living by that grace, but maybe, just maybe, we forget that one thing. And there are other things that become important to us or we think are important to us, and they pull our attention away from that one thing. Let's get back to that one thing. If there is anything that you need to do about that one thing, let's do that tonight. If you need to respond in a public way, will you? As together we stand and as we sing.